Welcome to my home. It is so nice to connect with you guys again. I'm going to be talking about a difficult subject today. It has a little bit to do with politics. It has a lot to do with the international world. So here's the theme that I'm going to be focusing on. I'm going to be talking about third world countries. I've lived in 3 third world countries. And I've seen them, all 3 of them, advance into advanced countries. So what's going on? What's happening with those countries? And what are the issues? What are the politics? What are the spiritual implications for us? So the countries are Taiwan. I was in Taiwan from 54 to 70. So I had like 14, 15, 16 years in Taiwan as a resident. And then I lived in Indonesia from 83 to 92, so 9 years in Indonesia. And I've been in China ever since as a resident. So these were all third world countries when we got there. So I'd like to claim credit that I turned them into advanced nations, but it wasn't me. Things were going on economically, politically, socially that made those countries change. So let's talk about some of those issues in each of the countries. When I got to each of those countries, poverty was unbelievable. When my parents made it to Taiwan, there were people dying on the street. I remember hearing my dad say that you would never, if you packed a lunch to go on the ferry to cross the Hong Kong harbor from the New Territories to the island or back, you never let anybody see that you had food in your package. If you had food, they would attack you and take your food. People were starving. It was rough. That was at the end of World War II. And there was a lot of poverty going on then. Then corruption. Indonesia, Hong Kong, China, Taiwan. Corruption is synonymous with those countries. I have to be careful because some of you guys that are listening to this now are from Hong Kong, Taiwan, China. And I don't want to insult you, but the levels of corruption were unbelievable. How much you could buy your way through. The governor of our province, he had like $300 million in bullion, gold bullion. And he tried to fly it out of China at the end of the communists, when the communists were taking over to try and get to Taiwan. He didn't make it because the bullion was too heavy and his plane had to go down. And I don't know the whole story. I've just heard little fragments of that story. But corruption is a horrible thing in third world countries. It is based on opportunity, which is my next point. The thing with third world countries is they have opportunities to change and to make things great. If you look how America started, it was the opportunity of the free world and the open world. Almost all countries have opportunities and they can make things happen, but it's hard. You need to have the leadership behind you. You have to have good people behind you. You have to invest a lot of energy and power into those opportunities to make them actually happen. And the countries that have taken their opportunities and done good things with them have done an amazing job. So if you look at any successful country, they have utilized their move from poverty, out of corruption, into opportunity. And they have done a good job. All right, so who am I? My name is Finn Torgeson. You're in my home right now, listening to me talk. I am the son of a Norwegian immigrant family. Both my mom and dad were Norwegians and became naturalized U.S. citizens. I grew up in Taiwan, where my dad was a linguist for the Amos people. It was a tribal mountain language that is the largest tribal language in Taiwan. My mom raised 7 kids and did an awesome job. So my history is in Taiwan, I grew up under martial law. When I was in Taiwan, Taiwan was under Chiang Kai-shek, the Kuomintang, and the martial law that they imposed on Taiwan. Later in 82, 83, my wife Sandy and I moved to Indonesia, and we were under a benevolent dictatorship of Suharto. Basically, it was a dictatorship. I don't know how benevolent it was. And it was the largest Muslim country in the world. And so you had to be careful what you said and what you did. So back to Taiwan. While I grew up in Taiwan in the 50s and 60s, we understood that if you were ever near a phone, you never said anything negative about the government. Every phone in Taiwan was tapped. We found out later, we actually met many of the people that did the transcriptions of all of our phone calls in Taiwan. So that was martial law. Dictatorship in Indonesia, it was less intense. They didn't have the technology for all that phone tapping and all that stuff. They basically, if you were not Muslim and you were against the government, you were in trouble. So you had to be very, very careful. And so 9 years of Indonesian, I don't want to call it dictatorship, but it was a benevolent dictatorship. They knew that they had to do something good for the country or the people would rebel. But I will say that my wife and I, Sandy and I, found ways through the system there. We made a few rules that we would live by. One is we would never pay bribes. We would never give money to anybody who wanted money for services. And so I had to provide forms for visas every year. And it took 8 months of the year to get the visa approved in Indonesia in those days. So my passport was in the visa office for 8 months of every year. I would go in, and I had a Japanese colleague. He trained me. He said, Finn, tell them stories. Tell them some fun stuff that they would never have heard about any other way. So I would go into the visa office and I'd meet with, now you need to know there were 40 visa offices in 3 different cities. To get my visa done in 1 year, I had to go to 40 different offices. And so what Katsuhiko Seno said was, just enjoy your time there and don't be in a hurry. Always have more time than they do. If you have more time than they do, you own them. If they're in a hurry, they need you. If you're in a hurry, you need them. So always be patient. Always take your time. Never be in a hurry. So I would go in and I would tell them about snowstorms in Minnesota. I would tell them about whatever, stories from all over the world that I could tell them. And after a year or two, these government officials actually looked forward to me showing up at their office because I entertained them and I kept them going. And they'd say, oh, we'll fill out that form for you. I've talked to Indonesian people living in Indonesia and they go, no, government officials never fill out the forms for you. You have to do all the work yourself. And I said, no, I never paid a bribe. And almost all my forms were filled out by Indonesian officials. And they go, what are you talking about? And so thank you, Katsuhiko Seno, the Japanese guy that taught me how to be patient and tell stories. So that was Indonesia. Okay, I drove a car in Indonesia. I'm sorry, I have to tell you this. I hate driving in America. In the Western countries, driving is so boring. There's no life. So I ride a motorcycle when I'm in the States as much as I can. Because at least on a motorcycle, you have to stay alert and really pay attention to what you're doing and what's going on. I grew up being taught that you always need to know the 3 cars that are behind you. And so my driving instructor used to say, give me the color and the make of the 3 cars behind you at any moment in time. And today, I do that to kids here in America, and I'm not sure that even Joshua here could answer that one when he's driving. You always pay attention behind you, to your sides, to your front, everywhere. I love driving in Indonesia and in China and in Taiwan. and it was wild. I actually rode motorcycles there too. And I come back to the States, and Americans are so laid back and inattentive to the world around them that they don't see what's happening. So martial law was Taiwan, dictatorship was Indonesia, communistic socialism was China. 26 years I've lived under communist socialism. I need to be careful what I say here, but I really don't care. If you want to live under socialism and want to vote for socialism, move to China. Just go there. I've lived there for 26 years. I've made it through. I have tons of friends. I understand the world they're in, but it's not a good system. It's the one-party system actually works pretty well. It's more effective than a multi-party system, but it is also very difficult in many other ways. All right, let me give you the other side of socialism. Norway and most of Northern Europe is socialistic. Can you think of anything positive that has come out of Europe since the end of World War II? What war have they stopped? What crisis have they prevented? My family's from Norway, so I really like the Norwegian history. But before 1968, Norway was one of the poorest countries in Western Europe. But they sent out more missionaries than anybody else in the Western world to evangelize, to reach the world. Then in 68, they discovered oil, and they became in the next few years the wealthiest country in Europe. And now they use their money to buy missionaries from other countries to go. But very few Norwegians go. The more you live under extreme wealth, extreme socialism, the less you do. The less you do. So here's my lesson for today. Study history. Really study history. And the real study of history is about primary sources. When you study history, don't listen to other people. Don't listen to me. Go back to the primary sources and find out what really happened and what really went on and what's important from those time periods. So I do mission work. I've worked in these different countries, Taiwan, Indonesia, China, families from Norway. I live in America. How do you know what's the real history of those places? Find the primary sources. If you don't know what primary sources are, look that up. Figure it out. And go to primary sources and figure out what is the real history of those locations, not the political correct jargon. So go back and really research what's going on and ask God, what are you calling me to do? How am I supposed to deal with this? I never dreamed I'd work in 3 third world countries and see them all become advanced countries. I'd like to claim the credit for it, but I can't. It wasn't me. But in that time period, what God did in building his church in those 3 countries is very interesting. Indonesia and China, the church has grown like crazy. Taiwan, not so. Taiwan is still very difficult to get a church started in Taiwan. There are churches. They're good churches, but they're not growing very big. And they're like 1 or 2% of the total population are Christian, whereas in China it's like 7 or 8%. So be ready to see what God would have you do in any place you might go to, either to serve him as a missionary or just in business or just in your life, however you are. Thank you for being in my home today.